Welcome and thank you for joining us. We'll begin in 2 minutes. If you just joined, welcome and thank you so much for joining us. We'll get started in about 1 minute. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm Cheryl Gomez, Chief Financial and Operations Officer at the study group and a Managing Director or editor of the Handbook series. We're really excited for this webinar today. We'll be exploring Volume 2 of the Handbook for Assessment in the Service of Learning, and this is the third session in our multi-part series, spotlighting the 3 volumes of the Handbook.
Hi, everyone. I'm Lauren Catuli from the study group. Grateful to be with you all this afternoon. As we move through the session today, please feel free to drop your name in the chat so we can get a sense of who's in the room. And you can engage in the chat throughout our time together today by using the chat or the question and answer feature. You also may see a timer pop up on the screen as we move into the panel part of our discussion today to help us all stay on track. And then lastly, I'll be dropping session materials along the way. If there's anything that you need or have questions about, especially related to technology, you can send me a message or an email.
Today we'll be providing a brief walkthrough of the series editors and contributors, and provide context of the focus of Volume 2, Reconceptualizing Assessment to Improve Learning. And we'll move then to panel discussions with Volume 2 authors and editors.
We'll put this question in the chat in a moment in hopes that you'll answer it as well. I am grateful to be moderating today with Steve Cerici, the Executive Director of the Center for Educational Assessment and Distinguished Professor at UMass Amherst, as well as Series Editor for the Handbook and Lead Editor for Volume 2. In a moment, I'm going to ask our panelists, Susan, Tiana, Neil, Maria Elena, and Steve, as well as Steve, to introduce themselves and share an example of assessment in the service of learning experience that has been meaningful for you as a learner. Alternately, I'll ask them to share an assessment in the service of learning that you have designed for or used with a learner. All kind of model what we're looking for here. My name is Eric Tucker, President and CEO of the study group. This week, our second grader, Claire, performs Willy Wonka Jr. on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday evenings. The singing and dancing and memory practice over the course of the last 3 months gain meaning and purpose through the community-wide performances with what you might call whole game learning. So we'll start with Steve.
Hi. Oh, I thought we were going to get a URL to get tickets for the Willy Wonka. But thank you, Eric. My name's Steve Cerici, and it's been such a pleasure working with Eric and Cheryl and everyone else on this handbook series, particularly Volume 2, which we'll talk about today. About a year and a half ago, I was working on some co-design, and that's where we try and engage, get out of our offices and stop dealing with the thousands of data points that we have and talk to actual students who are impacted by our exams. And we engaged with some adult education students about what they liked and about what their experiences were like in taking tests. And two things I learned. One was adult learners have had just pretty traumatic experiences with tests. So when we talked about what they would like to see better, how they think it could be improved, one of the themes was there's a lack of transparency in testing. So students are like, when you give me a number, that means nothing to me. It's kind of like this black box. So I want to see the items that I took. I want to see what I got right. And if I didn't get it right, I want to know why. So in developing the assessments, some of the diagnostic assessments for the Adult Skills Assessment Program that we're doing now at UMass, we actually have at the end of the assessment, they can access the items, see what they took, click to see the correct answer if it's wrong. And then also we've got feedback on the incorrect option. So I feel like we engaged with the community, learned some things, and ended up with a more improved assessment. Am I popcorning to somebody else, Eric?
Yes, please popcorn.
Sure. How about you, Neil?
Okay, now that I have my sound on. Neil Kingston, University of Kansas. Um, I got to this point of intense focus on assessment in the service of learning in two jumps. I was originally trained as a classical psychometrician, applied psychometrician. I did a lot of work with equating and all sorts of arcane stuff, none of which helped students. And then I got the chance to become the Associate Commissioner of Education in Kentucky in the early years of their Educational Reform Act. And that got me thinking a lot more about student learning and how assessment might be able to help. But then a little after that, I went to a small at the time testing company that became Measured Progress and got into some conversations with Rick Stiggins. And Rick was talking to me about his background. Rick was a terrible student in high school. And I related to that because I was a pretty poor student in high school also. And then he told me that he didn't get his act together till he went into the Army. And after he was drafted in the Army, he'd go through all this training. And the first thing they would do in the training is they would show them the test that was that the last class had to pass in order to demonstrate that they'd mastered all the materials. And all of a sudden, whoa, this epiphany was brought to me by him. Tests do more than just evaluate what you know. They can show you what you have to know, and that can help you with your learning. And someone who had been a terrible student for his entire life, this was all turned around, and he became one of the great voices in formative assessment because of tests.
Malena?
Thank you so much for all these examples. Malena Oliveri, Lincoln, Nebraska. I work remotely for Purdue, and I'm excited to see some folks noted that they're from Nebraska or that they live in Nebraska. So that's really exciting because there's not a lot of us psychometrics. So an example that resonates with me, I think I want to just mention the example that we have in our chapter, Building Culturally and Linguistically Responsive Workplace Assessments for Learning, and the applications that we have for engineering education. So the example that we discuss in the chapter is about performance-based engineering tasks. And the reason why it really resonates with me is because I worked in the French immersion schools before, working with students who were learning a second language and had needed to learn content at the same time that they needed to learn um, mesh, content and language at the same time. So the example I have, students work on a real-world challenge, designing a stroke recovery system and proposing a low-power application-specific integrated circuit for a medical device that delivers safe neurostimulation to support stroke rehabilitation. And what makes this assessment powerful is the immersion of students in an authentic engineering environment, where they must have balance technical content as well as linguistic demands, cultural demands, ethics, manufacturing, quality control, and working together as a team. So we also discuss how tasks need to be adapted for students that come from different cultures and languages, or when the tasks are used in an international context. So this experience has shown me how to thoughtfully design assessment that can drive deeper learning, bridge technical and human-centered thinking, and prepare students for real-world engineering practices. So I'll popcorn it to Tiana.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Tiana. I work with awesome colleagues at UCLA Crest. My example for assessment as learning would be a ruler measurement activity we routinely give to undergraduates at UCLA who are enrolled in research apprenticeship courses. And the setup is simple. We ask the students who typically come in first or second year with no prior exposure to measurement concepts to measure a group member's height using 3 rulers, one in inches, one in milliliters, and one with an arbitrary interval that Greg and I just arbitrarily made up. And we found this performance assessment or task to be a very good way to surface prior knowledge, as well as to provide a low-stake, engaging way to guide the students into key measurement concepts like instrument choice, precision, reliability, and measurement error. And so, yeah, that's my example.
Thank you. Sue?
Hey everybody, I'm Sue Brookhart from Duquesne University. My example is an elementary school example that was invented and carried out by a student teacher. And part of the point in choosing this one is if a 20-year-old can do it, we can all do it. We're in a 3rd grade class. The students have one 6-week session to learn the multiplication tables, a memory task, but they have to do it. Patty designed 2 tools to go with the assessment. Was the conventional 100 facts in 5 minutes test that you probably all had when you were in elementary school. Patty designed 2 tools to go with that. One, a reflection sheet that she called GPAR, Goals, Plan, Act, Reflect. And one, a bar graph where the students had to predict what their next Friday's 100 fact test would be in percent, 80%, 90%. And then next to that, that Friday, they had to draw the bar right next to their prediction for what they actually got. Predictions got a whole lot more accurate after the first week. But the genius of it, the genius of it was the GPAR sheet. Goals had to be specific. Not, I want to get an 80, but I want to learn my 7 times tables better. Or I want to do it faster, something substantive. Plan was things like, how am I going to study? Is it flashcards? Is it my mother will help me? Some kind of strategy. But the fun part was what the kids called their steps, this bar graph. In fact, they got so excited about doing the bar graph that some of them got to 100 before the weeks were over. No, I want to keep going. I'll do it in 4 minutes instead of 5 minutes. It had everything. It turned a rote memory task into metacognition, learning how to learn, which serves learners better than almost anything I could think of. It was fun. It turned a task that usually is kind of dull, memorizing 100 facts, into something they looked forward to. And a 20-year-old did it. She was an extraordinary 20-year-old, but not so exceptional that we can't I'll take a lesson.
Thank you so much for sharing those examples. We really appreciate you each joining us today. The handbook series advances the Gordon Commission's call to really transform assessment from a tool of measurement into a catalyst for learning. And it works to reimagine assessment as integral to teaching and student growth, and really to build bridges between research, practice, and policy. The series itself features 56 chapters that are really of cutting edge research and practice from leading experts. And it serves as a deep resource for educators, researchers, and really the next generation shaping the future of assessment. And some of the editors include Edmund W. Gordon, Stephen Cerici, Eleanor Armour Thomas, Eva Baker, Howard Everson, and Eric Tucker. And we really appreciate each of you and the important work that has been done for this series to become available. This project has been a voluntary effort fueled by passion and really sustained by a supportive community of scholars. We're really grateful for the nearly 90 contributors and teams whose insight and scholarship made this project possible. Some of you are joining us today, and this work has been remarkable, and we appreciate your contributions.
Thank you, Cheryl. For decades, and as recently as the wonderful launch event hosted by Steve at UMass this last Friday, our friend, mentor, and co-editor, Professor Edmund W. Gordon, has been making the public case and challenging educators to rethink assessment, not merely as a tool for measuring learners, but as a means to foster it. Today, we hear from Professor Gordon, our 104-year-old friend and mentor. As we do, please request on or reflect on this question as we listen to his remarks. How might assessment be reimagined as a tool to improve teaching and learning?
For decades, we've utilized educational assessment too narrowly, often to rank or sort students.
I'm sorry, Eric. Were you
or to
asking
hold
anybody in
somebody
particular that question?
accountable. All, useful purposes.
Everyone in the chat.
Oh, in
The
the chat.
result,
Okay, thank you.
however, is a system that exceeds at the delivery of a verdict, but it often falls far short of a meaningful path toward better learning.
So we are not listening to brief remarks from Professor Gordon.
Unfortunately, there's a growing movement that seeks to change this. In it, we argue that the most valuable information an assessment can provide isn't the score, but a story of a story that is rich with insights. We call that assessment in the service of learning.
I apologize if any of you had difficulty hearing, and glad that many could. We'll be circulating the video so you can hear his remarks if you missed them. Thank you to the many of you who are a part of launching the Handbook for Assessment in the Service of Learning series. Thank you also for those who attended or, in Steve's case, led the in-person launch event at UMass Amherst College of Education, including our esteemed colleagues, Professor Gordon, Steve Cerici, as well as the Commissioner of Education in Massachusetts, the University of Massachusetts Chancellor, and the Dean of the College of Education. It was a wonderful event. We are broadly committed to raising the profile of Professor Gordon's charge of assessment in the service of learning, and today marks the launch of a policy competition at the Fordham Institute called the Wonkathon, or the Wisest Wonk competition. Edmund W. Gordon submitted a call for assessment to be seen as a backbone for reading improvement, with a piece that references 20 chapters from the handbook series. If during the course of this session you appreciate the important work of handbook contributors and want to join us in honoring Edmund W. Gordon, please consider voting using the links that will be entered in the chat. Today, this piece is one of 48 submissions in the competition, but with your help, the topics we're discussing here today can become more central to the work of nearly all states around the country. Steve, now we'll hand things to you to share background on Volume 2, Reconceptualizing Assessment to Improve Learning.
Yes, thanks, Eric. Volume 2 is exciting because, having the background of a psychometrician and trying to enter the world of pedagogy, at the same time knowing that this was the volume that was going to talk about a reconceptualization, I had one person in mind that I just knew had to get, who's already that bridge kind of between the psychometric and teaching communities, and that was Sue Burkhardt. And that's why you see her chapter first. And then I really wanted to bring in Neil Kingston when we started to think about scales of measurement and how to communicate results. So those were two of the chapters. There's 25 authors across Volume 2, so I can't really spend a lot of time on each one. But as Cheryl mentioned, everyone volunteered their time. So we have 25 people volunteering their time, and we have chapter on self-regulated assessment system by Heffer. And one of the big movements and the improvements in educational testing right now is more culturally responsive assessment. So of course I reached out to Milena Oliveri and her colleagues, and related to that, personalizing assessment. So we have Randy Bennett, Eva Baker, and the professor. Um, and then I didn't know much about game-based assessments, and they say you can learn a lot through teaching. You can also learn a lot through editing. So what I learned from Heffer and from James Gee on game-based learning, portfolio assessment, Carol Bonilla Bowman and Edmund Gordon have a chapter there. And then what Tiana's going to talk about later, all the evidence of learning that you can get from having students interact with games and other materials that Greg and Tiana and others from UCLA put together. So I'm really proud of Volume 2 because we've got some visions for where we should be heading, coupled with some applied examples and experiences of how we can do things better. So that's kind of like an overview of Volume 2. I think now we should move to the questions for the panelists. Does that sound right, Eric?
Absolutely. So
Go
we'll
ahead.
ask at the outset each of the panelists to share in 2 minutes or less some essential arguments from your handbook chapter, making explicit connections, if you will, between emerging technologies, including AI, and the potential of assessment in the service of learning. So let us know when you're ready to move slides, and we'll go from Sue to Milena to Tiana and then to Neil. And once we've had the table set by our panelists, Steve, you'll kind of moderate that first round of questions. Thank you. Sue?
Do I have 2 slides coming up? If so, please move to the first one. There you go. And they've given me 2 minutes to do this. So I started with the idea that the chapter was about serving learners, the people, the children, or the adults, I suppose. And so I started with the question, what do they need in order to learn? You're just going to have to take my word for it that learners need, in addition to being healthy and well and food and all those things, they need a supportive learning culture. They need clear learning goals and success criteria. They need to participate in the regulation of learning, self-regulation, but also co-regulation with teachers and peers, and instructional and assessment materials and computers and everything helps. The professional practice way of saying that is something called the formative learning cycle, which I'll talk more about later. And they need high quality feedback, lots of it, and opportunities to use it. In the chapter, I have backed those up with literature, which I don't have the time to cite now, but I want to just make sure you know this is not Sue's good idea. This is information that comes from research. So, given that, how do assessments meet learners' needs? And the first one is clearly it's got to be a high quality task. If you ask them to do something stupid, it won't help them. Attention to the formative learning cycle. Where am I now? Where am I going? Where am I now? And where to next? In the structure and sequence of classroom learning, the assessments have to help the flow of that. Where am I going? Where am I now? Where to next? Assessments meet learners' need if feedback is of high quality and produces useful information, and where possible, is based on learning progressions or some other way of understanding how learning develops in this content area. Next slide, please. So jumping just to the recommendations, better understanding of the results and of increasing student voice and choice in assessment. We really don't know a lot about how assessment goes when you give students choices. AI can help with that in diversifying the options that students are able to choose from. Increase in the quality of assessment questions and tasks, both classroom and external. AI can help there. I feel like I should be able to explain how, and I don't have time, but an increase in the quality and usefulness to learners of various kinds of scoring schemes and feedback comments and understanding the role of the conditions under which to deploy them. I think in my first question, I'll get to say more about how AI will help there. So I'll leave that there. Increase in the repertoire of available formative assessment strategies for both teachers and students. More judicious use of external assessment results, not trying to make that be formative, but using it to raise questions, and developing more external formative assessments that are not accountability assessments that can help. And more research and development on promising programs that mix internal classroom work with external assessment. The classroom walls are porous now because of computers. And so research and development teams can help develop assessments that are used in the classroom, teachers' time, with student and teacher input on when and how to use it in a way that hasn't happened before. And so those are 6 things I would recommend for the future. My time is up, and I feel like I need to explain all those, but I'm not going to. Talk more later.
Thank you. Milena?
Sure, thank you so much. Just want to give a little bit of background to my own upbringing and say that I was actually born in Peru and came to Canada, where I learned in English and then I also learned French, and I taught in French classrooms in French immersion. So the notion of culture and language, and then I also speak 5 languages, and so the notion of culture and language is very dear and near to my heart. Both as a learner, as an educator, I spent about 10 years or so in the classroom because before I became a psychometrician or started studying psychometrics, at which time I met Steve. So that was really exciting because I got into a lot of international assessment issues as well and comparability. And so within this notion, I want to just bring it now into to today's context and say, the nature of how we learn, who we learn with, what classroom environment looks like, all of that is changing and it's changing really quickly. So I think for that reason, we need to really think about, how to integrate cultural and linguistic backgrounds into learning. So it's not an add-on, it's actually centered to learners' assets. And here we think about Bob Mislevy's sociocognitive perspectives. And so I think that's really essential to any assessment any interactive assessment, any assessment that really gets into performance-based, not like, do we know what's 3+2? But how do we engage in performance assessments? How do we engage students into contexts that they may be highly unfamiliar with, like semiconductors, for example, microelectronics? That's not something that most people grow up thinking about. And we desperately need people in those environments to fill vacancies that are forthcoming. So we need to think about a strategy for assessment that brings all those elements together. And so these are the three questions that we, with Carrie Douglas and Maya Poe, we think about in our chapter. So, and we explained through different strategies, rubrics and so on, like how do cultural and linguistic backgrounds affect fairness? How do we think about that in assessment? How do we bring in those individual learners' backgrounds directly into how they're interacting with assessment and how we're interpreting their scores? How could we utilize or leverage AI to support assessment for learning systems, to provide feedback, and not just feedback that is the same for everybody, but feedback that is meaningful, that is useful to the learners, right? And there's here some heuristics, some quick ways to think about it. There's a lot more that we talk about in the chapter. So including diverse perspectives to show how engineering problems and solutions may vary across communities. A lot of engineering has to do with, on-site interventions or on-site designs. And so we have to think about the effects of those designs on the communities where that design is occurring. Also thinking about how different individuals demonstrate understanding. So the inclusion of different materials for learning, not just textbooks, but diagrams, short videos, bilingual experiences, translanguaging, for example. I'm thinking about how to support diversity in language because not everybody's first language is English. So how do we, and even if it is, not everybody has grown up in an environment where STEM is sort of spoken about every day. So how do we support that learning through glossaries, through translations, explanations, scaffolding? And how do we integrate students' experiences so that when we are engaging with performance-based tasks, they are relevant to their backgrounds, and it doesn't feel really foreign or unfamiliar. And that's important for design, and that's also important for scoring, so that, for example, if somebody knows the content but said it in a different language, we could leverage AI to understand that content knowledge and not penalize it. So those are some of the heuristics, and that I can explain more or after if you want to follow up, but that's all I want to say for now.
Thank you so much. Tiana?
Okay, so our chapter titled Learner System Interactions as Evidence of Student Learning and Performance. In the chapter, we can advance to the first slide. Thank you. So in the chapter, we have tried to advance two core arguments about learner system interactions. The first argument is one that has gained a great deal of traction. When individuals interact with a system, such as a learning game, an online module, or any interactive digital environment, those interactions can serve as a source of evidence of their knowledge and learning processes. So this idea has gained momentum because it aligns with the greater movement toward learning-sensitive assessment practices, and also because technology makes it possible to track fine-grained interaction data at scale. But simply collecting interactions is not enough. So for our second argument, we push this idea further. We're still on the first slide. Thank you. We push this idea further by conceiving interactions as observation that can be intentionally designed to support the measurement and/or improvement of student learning, rather than something that just happens as students use technology. And by conceiving interactions as observations, we can adopt a validity perspective to address issues related to design and use of interactions, as well as the design of tasks that can yield informative interactions in ways that echo with how we scrutinize the development and use of a task in relation to a construct. And next slide. Thank you. So here we focus on the connection between traceable design and validation and provide more examples in our chapter. We view this as multi-layer process where test, data, algorithm designs are not separable pieces, but parts of a chain that shape the kinds of inferences we can draw from interactions. And each design layer sets up critical conditions for the next. And the level of traceability we build into this chain really matters. It determines how well we can explicate and defend this interaction to inference pathway. And it also shapes where and how AI ML methods can responsibly enter the pipeline. And that concludes my opening remark. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. When my co-author came up with the title, Removing the Psycho from Education Metrics, I really came to love this because I enjoy plays on word. And psycho could mean having no connection to reality, as I would argue much of traditional assessment has when your reality is teaching students and student learning. And it had another meaning, though, because psychometrics has been the popular term, not edumetrics, although that term does exist. It's hidden in corners and in various places. And psychometrics came into being trying to solve a very different kind of problem than education metrics. Stay with the previous slide for a little longer, please. I would trace the origins or the philosophical underpinnings back to Charles Darwin and his cousin Galton. Darwin was trying to find the characteristics that differentiated one species for another. And so the science of group differences came about, and initially psychometrics was trying to compare people and decide how to group them in a variety of different ways. And based on the work that they did, then Wilhelm Wundt and Ernst Weber and others continued to develop the early days into the creation of scales, because we were trying to mirror what the physical sciences were doing with the various kinds of measures that they had created. And this was all wrong for education. But as we started to think far too late, but nonetheless in our current era, about backwards design, evidence-centered design, and one quote from our chapter: as an alternative, one could design a test with instruction in mind, first designing the score report. Start with that. Most likely to help teachers better teach students, and only then designing the test that would support that score report. Next slide, please. And so here is an example of a score report that we developed for the Dynamic Learning Maps assessment. And you will see some things in common with what some of my colleagues have just been saying before, especially with regard to what Sue was saying about formative assessment. And so this score report shows you where you're going. It's that fourth column that says target. It shows you where you are right now, whatever's been colored in green on this. And it shows you where you're going to go next in order to get to that target or even beyond. Next slide, please. With that idea in mind, how do we actually put together the technical underpinnings that are going to support that kind of score reporting? Because it's not just as simple as, oh, here's a score report, now we design a test. You have to translate the items on the test into something that goes into that score report. And part of that has been with work in diagnostic classification models and BayesNet analysis. And so our diagnostic classification models can provide detailed skill mastery profiles. We start looking about what are the specific things that students know and can do, as opposed to just a scale where we say, oh, this student is a 612 and this student is a 714. Doesn't that tell you all you need to know? No, it tells you nothing at all. And a lot of the work that we've been doing is using learning maps as visualizations, using more complex versions of learning pathways, where there are multiple connections and multiple ways in which you can go to increase your knowledge. And all of this can be used to support personalized instruction. And all of this is part of transforming the purpose of assessment. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Neil. Appreciate that. We're going to move to some questions for authors of the individual chapters now. Sue, I'm going to start with you. Um, your chapter places the formative learning cycle at the center of assessment to serve learners. You also talk about feedback is moot unless students have an opportunity to use it. Can you say more about what are the most important things you'd like to communicate to listeners about the formative learning cycle?
I feel like I can not rough this time. The formative learning cycle, as I said, is just a professional practice version of how students, any learners, regulate their learning. So you need a goal. You need to know what it is you're trying to learn. Otherwise, it's just serendipitous learning. Intentional learning requires a goal. And then you need to do something, do many somethings in a sequence, and you need feedback all along the way. And the feedback needs to be useful information about where you are now and where you might go next that you can use and that your teacher can use to help plan the next bits. And that you can also use to see how you're going, which is why the kids loved coloring in those little bar graphs. They could see how they were going. And I'm only going to pick two of points in the formative learning cycle to share here. But one of the difficulties some teachers and students have is being specific enough about the learning target and success criteria. So yes, I want to learn to read. What does that mean? Well, it means you learn some vocabulary and you learn some comprehension skills and you learn, there are lots of things. And parsing out and getting some language to describe what those day by day, every day there's another new batch of things you have to learn. I think AI will be able to help teachers a lot with that. Now, I'm not a believer that AI can do anything yet. I would want to check everything that comes out of AI, but it's a whole lot easier to check something than to stare at a blank piece of paper or a screen. So I think AI will help teachers unpack learning targets into and give them some language to talk to students about with them. And some of that language will end up in success criteria or rubrics that they give students to help them see how they're going along. I think that'll be cool. The other place that I think I hope AI will help a lot is for personalized feedback on whatever the students do, keyed to those learning goals. Um, you read a lot about, I'm going to use AI for grading. Well, I think, okay, true. Eventually, AI may be able to help you grade. But teachers are going to grade what they have to grade anyway, because they've got to do it. But they can not give as much extended, elaborated, personalized feedback when they run out of time. And I think AI will help by being a labor-saving device to help teachers give more extended, elaborated feedback if we can get it keyed to those success criteria. I am not the person who's going to end up teaching anybody how to write the prompts to do those things, but I am pretty sure that if it could become automatic and channeled and assist the prompt writing were assisted, I think AI could help with that right now, providing teachers. I've run into many teachers who want to just get something out of the machine and use it without reviewing it, and that scares me yet. But anyway, where am I going? Lots more language to describe that well and examples to show you what it looks like. Where am I now? Lots more personalized, elaborated feedback, key to the success criteria. And then
Yeah, that feedback is going to be so critical for where to next. So thank you for that. And yeah, hopefully we can leverage AI. Tiana, I'm going to move to you next. In your chapter, one of the things that resonated that we pulled out is I'm going to quote now, regardless of whether the measurement target is learning, motivation, attention, engagement, effort, or metacognition, how a learner responds to task demands is dependent on the degree to which the task is able to elicit a response representative of what we're trying to measure. What critical research and development challenges remain for us to make progress in these domains?
Thank you for the question. One area I think would be useful for R&D is to develop a base or database or knowledge base of clear and precise definitional processes for a target construct. Going back to, I think, Sue's comment, when we talk about reading or learning in terms of reading, how does that look like? And this is also tied to my second suggestion of having some baseline traceability. And also, Steve, your chapter on validity, where we talk a lot about use and consequences when it comes to validity and validation. So relative to the intended use and stakes, I think it would be desirable to establish a minimum level of traceability requirements, especially when we move to more complex domains like games, training simulations. I think it would be first helpful to define what minimum looks like relative to the specific use case, especially if we take seriously the idea that traceability is a prerequisite for making defensible claims. And then lastly, because part of my training is in quantitative methods and statistics, I will look for development of integrated models that support evidence accumulation triangulation. And those are my comments.
Yeah, that's so important. I hope there are students listening because I heard many dissertation topics there. So thank you for that. Neil, I'm going to move to you. Unfortunately, we don't have enough time for you to talk about the performance assessment you created, Face the Music. We might need a volume 4 for that. But what I do want to pull out is what you wrote about in our chapter in reporting that relates to dynamic learning maps alternate assessment. So one of the things you identify were the high-level features to guide the development of dynamic learning maps. Um, Help us understand and say a bit more about what matters most about these design features.
So I can't cover that completely. I've given half-hour talks and written articles on that one question you just asked me. So I'm going to pick at a couple of the ideas from some different angles. The first was fine-grained learning maps. Um, People will rightly comment when they look at what we've done with the size of our learning objectives and the number of learning objectives that we have embedded in our learning maps. So, for example, for our seventh grade students with significant cognitive disabilities, these are students, the approximately 1% of students who are the most challenged in their learning. The first level of one of our standards is to match a picture representation with a real object, just knowing the ability, the linkage between something that is a real object and a representation of that object. So that's a separate node, a separate concept. Identify concrete details in an informational text. Now we're getting to texts as we're building on it. Identify implicit main idea in an informational text and identify multiple main ideas in an informational text. And for many of our students, it would be that last one that is the size of the learning map or of the objective that we'd be thinking about. But one reason was because these students learn at a much slower pace. We wanted to break it into smaller pieces so that we could not only see the progress, the students could see the progress they're making. And one of the interesting things that we found, the parents of these students had no idea the progress that their children were making before we actually did this. We had several focus groups with parents on this. And the other reason that we chose fine-grained learning maps, and that not everyone would necessarily need to do that, was our intention to use BaseNet. And BayesNet requires acyclic graphs. Now I'm getting a little technical for you people in the audience there. This doesn't help. Just put your thoughts aside for a second and meditate on just assessment in the service of learning. But to be acyclic, it means that you cannot simultaneously have learning of this one thing A help you learn this other thing B, but learning B goes back and helps you improve on your knowledge of A. You can't have that cycle in there. And the finer grained you are, the less likely you have that cycle. So that is something that was very specific to our population and might not be needed by everyone. I also want to talk about, in the time that I have, instructionally relevant testlets. Because one of the things that I discovered over my first 20 or 30 years in the field, and that remains the truth now, is assessment has so much power over teachers and students that they will start teaching to those assessments. Even if you tell them don't do it, they will start doing that. I've had so many cases working with school systems where new learning stops in February and practicing for the test starts between February and May. And so, how do you get around this? How do you either reduce the power of the test or harness the power of the test? And one way to harness the power of the test is to create instructionally relevant testlets. So in fact, the test starts to look more and more like what good instruction looks like. And so when teachers are teaching to the test, they are doing less damage and doing more good than they would otherwise. I also want to talk very briefly, and it'll be the last thing in response to this question, about instructionally embedded assessment. Because I actually don't even like anymore in my career to talk about assessment as if it's a separate activity. Assessment is part and parcel of good instruction. And it goes back to what Sue and many others have been saying about formative assessment all along. If you don't know where you're going, how are you going to get there? If you don't know where you are right now, how are you going to get to the next steps to get to where you want to be going? And so, if you save your test till the end of the year, then it is a useless activity. I've sometimes used the example, most people hate it, but I love it, so I'm going to repeat it anyway, of your house breaking a dog, a puppy. You have this wonderful new puppy, and you put out your newspapers in your house, and it doesn't use the newspapers, and it's going all over the house. And you wait till the end of the year, and then you whack it on the nose with the newspaper. This does not help. No one would ever do that in trying to train a dog or in anything else. We should not be doing that. So those are the some of the important characteristics.
Thank you, Neil. The question was focusing on the design of the assessment, but quickly what I'm learning, it's the design of the instruction with assessment as part of that. So thank you for that.
Mhm.
Melina, I don't want to lose you and your important work with your colleagues on the chapter. And in your chapter, you explored how culturally and linguistically responsive an approach to assessment can enhance workplace assessment for learning. And a lot of times we don't think about adult learners as much. Um, so when you think about the subject matter experts, such as industry professionals, educators, the learners themselves, and the other people that you're working with, can you tell us more about your framework of co-design that leads to more culturally and linguistically responsive assessment?
Sure. Thank you for the question. So just to reiterate the notion of how important, in my opinion, it is to think about culture and language of the learners. There's also a culture and language of the stakeholders for whom we are designing the tests. There's industry relevance, particularly in post-secondary education, when we are preparing learners to engage in the jobs that they're going to school for. So there's going to be a connection between what's being learned at school and what work they will be doing in the future. So when thinking about performance-based assessments, I think it's important to think through all the different components of what it involves to engage in performance-based tasks, such as engaging in the example I provided earlier about the ASIC design or the semiconductors and engaging with chip design, for example. So we have industry that has say as to what specific tools they're going to be engaging with, or what specific designs they care about, or how to engage in a team environment with different collaborators from different disciplines. So designing assessments or performance-based tasks has to speak about those needs, but it also has to speak about the students as they will be engaging with those tasks, so that the ASIC neurostimulation device, for example, we think about, well, how ethical is it? Or are there differences in how different cultures think of that for stroke recovery, right? How do we think about the families that are engaged, or the patients? How do we bring in our own culture and background, language background into those performance-based tasks? So in the chapter, we provide a framework for identifying the various stakeholders that are engaging in task design, how to engage, how to collect input from them, and how to make the task adaptive enough so that each of those elements can be walked through. And designing those types of tasks is not simple, right? So it requires coordinated efforts. It requires almost like a different language. So whenever I speak with industry about their needs, for example, I speak a different language than the one that I would speak to my faculty colleagues. So having that translational background so that the tasks are meaningful for learners, for industry, and academia is important for creating a pathway between how assessment is designed, used, and inferences are developed or made from that assessment. Yeah, go ahead.
I mean, I want to probe that more, but we're out of time. I know you're not going to say the word curriculum standard in the workplace, so we appreciate that translation. But given that the webinar is coming to a close, we'll encourage people to actually read the book. And Eric, let me turn it back to you.
Right. Cheryl?
Absolutely. As the screen is coming back up with our slide, we just hope that you can join us for our next webinar on this four-part series. It will be focused on Volume 3, examples of assessment in the service of learning, and it will be on December 4th at 1 p.m. We'll be sharing links for you to be able to register for that. You can also access our Assessment for Learning microsite, where each of the chapters is available as a downloadable PDF with a chapter cover, making it real simple to read the individual chapters and share them with your network. The study group on the next slide publishes a weekly roundup highlighting recent developments and initiatives at the intersection of AI assessment, data, research, and policy. And we invite you to sign up and share this newsletters with colleagues who may find it valuable. And then lastly, our Getting Smart series on advancing AI measurement and assessment system innovation is live. We are actively publishing these series over the next 8 months. And if you have a topic or idea and would like to collaborate, we'd love to hear from you. So please reach out. Eric?
So thank you to Steve for his leadership as editor of this volume, and leading the kind of wider group of series editors for volumes 1, 2, and 3. Thank you to Steve also for hosting an amazing launch event at UMass Amherst last Friday. It was just powerful to see Professor Gordon and Steve make the case for this work in that context. Thank you to each of the panelists for contributing to this conversation and joining us today. Thank you to each of you for spending this hour with us and for being part of a growing community of educators and researchers and solution developers committed to reimagining assessment to improve quality and particularly usefulness and usability. We hope today's discussion sparked ideas that you'll carry forward in your own practice, and we hope that you'll stay in touch. Thank you, everyone.